Today we're going to be looking at how trademark infringement occurs, what the key things are to look out for, and why this is something you really want to avoid moving forwards. So once a company has registered their trademark, they're obviously in a position then to enforce it moving forwards to ensure that no one else is infringing on their rights. As such, trademark infringement occurs when a party reproduces or applies a sign that someone else has already registered as a trademark, and that can be to something, products that are entirely different, or to goods and services that are the same or identical. So once a company is aware that its trademark is being infringed, they're obviously in a position to then enforce their rights against you. In terms of the types of infringement that we often see, they can come in sort of various forms. So if you get a similar trademark being applied to similar goods and services, if you get an identical trademark being applied to identical goods and services, so you've got sort of straightforward infringement. And you can also get it where you have a company with a considerable reputation and you've applied their mark in a completely different setting. So if you sort of opened a takeaway chain called Asda or something, despite the fact they might not be operating in that area, that would consist trademark infringement. Another key thing with trademark infringement to bear in mind is the influence on consumers and the actual impact it has on the ability of the trademark to perform its function. So the purpose of trademarks is to perform as an indication of origin for consumers. If multiple different companies are infringing each other's trademarks, the ability of the consumer to identify brands with their trademarks is impaired. So in terms of why it's important to avoid trademark infringement, there are multiple companies registering trademarks every day. Trademark registries are increasingly populated, so this is something that you really need to be aware of, and ignorance is never a defense to infringement. So enforcement is especially likely where you're dealing with bigger brands. Often we see companies where they will have people acting for them who are constantly searching the registries, looking online to see if any infringement of their rights has taken place. Businesses who receive trademark infringement allegations against them can suffer serious commercial consequences if it's something that they don't take seriously and don't deal with promptly when they are notified. And this can come by way of injunctive relief, the offering up, transfer and destruction of goods bearing the trademark, if it's been reproduced, damages on account of any lost revenue. If the matter goes all the way to trial, then you could also be liable for legal costs of the other side in certain circumstances. And also you might then be forced into rebranding, which depending on where you are in your sort of business life cycle can have entirely sort of wide-reaching consequences, and that in itself can be a very costly process for certain companies. So for all of those reasons discussed, trademark infringement is something that you really need to be aware of and something that you really want to avoid moving forwards. And we'll now have a look at the defences that are available if you are in a situation where you are ever accused. So in terms of the defences for trademark infringement, there is honest concurrent use. The use of your own name can be a defence in certain circumstances. Using the sign to indicate characteristics or the intended purpose of the goods. So if you're using the trademark descriptively, that would not qualify as infringement. And also timing, so you can't apply trademarks retrospectively. The trademark must be valid and registered in order to be relied upon. In each of those cases, you will obviously want to take legal advice to establish that if you can rely on any of these defences, because it's rarely simple, it's rarely cut and dry, and as we said, ignorance is not a defence to infringement. So if you're ever in a position where you are accused, it's best to seek specialist advice as soon as possible. So in terms of avoiding trademark infringement, there are a number of steps that you can undertake. The first thing at the very outset, when you're sort of imagining your brand, is to come up with a brand that is truly unique as far as possible. So the best trademarks are those that are entirely unrelated. to the goods and services that you're supplying. Also, if you can create a brand which is entirely made up word, then you've got the best chance of that not being already registered. And also, if you've got a trademark consisting of a number of words, essentially the more complex it is, the better chance that you have of successfully registering it. Another step to undertake is to perform a clearance search. This is something that we provide ourselves, but we also always advise our clients to go and do themselves at the outset. There is a search facility on the Intellectual Property Office website which we use ourselves, and which we recommend that you always go and check any brand that you are considering there as a sort of first point of reference. So the reason why a full clearance search is important is because whilst you can search on the office website, it doesn't give you any of the detail, and it's a very complex process. Trademarks are registered in respect of different classes, so there are all these factors to take into account. Just because an identical trademark exists on the register doesn't necessarily mean that you won't be able to register it, and equally, if you search your trademark on the Intellectual Property Office website and no results are returned, that doesn't mean that the mark is free to register. So to be sure, we would always advise that you seek specialist advice. And of course, finally, if you're operating under a brand, the best thing you can do is register it. Obviously, not only does that then give you the protection of having the registered trademark, it is also, if you're ever accused of infringement and you've successfully registered your mark properly, it gives you an easy response to anyone accusing you of infringement. Another thing to take into account is if you're planning to operate in any other jurisdictions. So trademarks operate territorially. If you are looking to expand into other jurisdictions, you should, once at each stage, take these steps again, whether that be a clearance search, making your investigations, because just because you've been able to register in a brand in one jurisdiction doesn't mean that someone else won't have beaten you to registering it somewhere else. And as a final point, if you're ever in doubt, the first thing we would recommend is that you take specialist legal advice. In certain circumstances, any allegations against you may be baseless, and sometimes you may have infringed. And in those circumstances, the best thing for you is to have an expert on your side to provide you the guidance you need and hopefully minimise the consequences and find the best resolution possible.